thank you so much for your talk and this picture of a transformation of knowledge and taxonomy, which was completely unknown to us. In einer gewissen Weise wissen wir, dass es mit chinesischen Enzyklopädien und Taxonomien immer so war. Wir verstehen sie nicht. Wir können sie einfach nicht verstehen. Lassen Sie uns vielleicht einen Versuch machen, unser Unverständnis oder auch unser schwieriges Verständnis ein bisschen zu klären. So, finally, we never understood Chinese taxonomy, and you confirmed our doubts in a certain way. But let's try to understand what we do not understand in just this history of Western sciences and concepts in Chinese thought. So I would have one question which intrigued me in your talk, and I think which is important for us, and something which I think in Europe, in Germany, United States, in Western culture exists between science and metaphysics, and this, in a certain way, introduced also by George Stuart Mills, and this is the thinking of society, which seems to have a very low or absent position in Chinese thought. So can you explain how the thinking of society, der Gesellschaftsbegriff, whatever, the notion, the concept of society, how does this enter in the system of thought in Chinese?
So, as I explained a little bit in my talk, that the concept of society is a new concept. However, it's not necessarily mean that we have of course, that it's very difficult to say the equivalent. But as I use that term, like Qun, it is the Confucian idea about the society, and also there were Sheji and some other kind of the terms for the society. But basically, the Qun means that at that time there was a clear distinction between the different kind of the groups. The groups of the insects, for example, the groups of animals. However, that was non-moral groups. It's no moral essence inside there. But for the groups or the sociology or the society, the term of society always linked to the idea of moral essence, that the social bond, together with the political system that developed from there. At the same time, the Great Transformation, I think this is the one aspect. The second aspect, I think that there was a transformation about the social order. Basically, as I also very briefly summarize that the early Confucian idea of rights and the music, it was a social order. But that kind of the social order, I don't know what kind of the Western concepts can represent it. Maybe it's not properly, but you can argue that like Max Weber's concept, the enchantment or the enchanted social order, which means that the order means something. It's within that there were certain kind of the beliefs, moral essence, and so on and so forth there. So everything inside it had some moral implications. So that kind of the idea of the Qun was very important to understand the society. However, that was also the counter-arguments against that, not only in the 19th century, but also in the Confucian ideas too, that basically they thought that the order, that kind of the social order disappeared, disenchanted. You can argue that though it's not the religious society. So that's why that order more or less like a structure and a function. So you understand that is a kind of the society. That's why human being as a moral existence, you need to know the meaning and the significance, the how to do it. You need to develop your epistemological practice. So that's why investigating things to achieving knowledge became so important since 10th century. So this is also linked to the idea of the idea of the social understanding, I think.
But let me ask another question just to this point, which is very interesting, that society and social order are not distinct, so society is social order in different groups. Does this change something for our view, for example, in distinguishing state on the one hand side and society on the other? So, you know, for our social political thinking, this opposition is strong and in a certain way necessary. Yeah,
it's not that clear that the clear binary of society and the state, because basically a lot of that is the idea of Qing started from very bottom. It's like a family. Basically, the core concept was a family, and then certain kind of the local community, like the village and so on and so forth. It's a she, you know, that is a certain kind of community, local community. The she means that the 社会. Now we translated the society. The first term, 社. We know that the schools, for example, the 社学, the early, or the 乡学, the 乡, the village, is a school of the village or the school of the local community, were really based on that. But there was no confrontation. There's a kind of the dichotomical division between the state and the society. But basically, it was the extension of the family to the political structure. This is the idea. Yeah.
Ich würde gerne noch Fragen anschließen, bitte Sie aber, sich bereits auf eigene Fragen vorzubereiten. Wir wollen Sie ja nicht unendlich langweilen und Sie zur Selbstbeschäftigung mit anregen. I just wanted to add perhaps two complete different questions. So the one question which is very important for us, not to understand China, but to understand contemporary China. Can you explain, also in your picture of sciences, your taxonomy, by which door and in which way specific economic knowledge entered or was imported into China? Because for us, this, I think it concerns all of us, how the Chinese economy was invented, and also this means with which knowledge it was invented.
This is a long, it's a long history, of course. It's a long process. And we talked earlier about society. It's an old pattern. It's not necessarily can use that pattern to explain the contemporary China at all. We talk about the individualism, talk about atomism, that started from later Qing, already there. The making of the individuals, making of the society, and the making of the state is a parallel process at that moment. And what here I mentioned the name of Yan Fu. He and also together with Liang Qizhao, Kang Yewei, but the Yan Fu was most important translator of the Western knowledge. He was the translator of the Adam Smith, the Wells of Nation, and Montesquieu, and the Spirit of Law, and John Stuart Mill, the Logics, and together with many books. And one of the most influential books was a short pamphlet, which was Huxley's Evolution and Ethics. But he did all these kind of the translation, not pure translation. He studied in Britain. He translated these the masterpieces at that time together with a lot of the footnotes. For example, he translated the Huxley's book, but he used Herbert Spencer's idea to be the footnotes, which means that the confronting ideas put into the one small books, and that made that the idea of evolution became influential. At the same time, he also did some the traditional scholarship, like he working on the Lao Tzu, and so his ideas about for example, the laissez-faire. He talked about that when he translated the Adam Smith. Later, he talked about a certain kind of the order laissez-faire. together with the Confucianism in the Han Dynasty, in the pre-Han Dynasty, especially the Huanglao Zhixue in the so-called Huanglao school, that was certain kind of in the early Han Dynasty that was very influential in a certain kind of the spontaneous order, rather than everything through the regulation of the state. So, but together with the massive translation, this is the one aspect. The second, he was not the only one, but the very important figure who tried to retrieve many classical Chinese concepts. In the 2,000 years ago, the people used that term. Later, not necessarily, not that popular. He tried to retrieve all these classical vocabulary to translate the Western concepts, to combine them together. So that made the understanding of it. He thought that later, the plain language was very difficult to understand these concepts. He showed that the distance between the certain kind of plain language with the Western concepts by using these re-employments of these vocabularies to translate that. So in this way, certain kind of the implication of those concepts in the Chinese context were permitted into the concepts. As I said that, for example, the sociology, he translated the sociology into the Qunxue. Immediately, the idea of Xunzi or idea of Mengzi or the later Confucian scholars' idea about the Qun were permitted into the concept of the society and the concept of sociology. That allowed him to put the sociology at the top of the whole structure or of the knowledge, the top of the hierarchy of the knowledge. This is in that sense, that's why the sociology for him was not a discipline, but something served as a metaphysics, like the spirit, let's say, to dominate the whole the systems. So this is the kind of the long process. But after the Mayforce moments, following the educational reform, basically, which was much more westernized, the whole disciplines and the discourse transformed, and those translations gradually were given up. The traditional translation were given up. It reinstalled some new. Of course, some of them still remain until now, but there's a huge transformation. Yeah.
But is it correct? So I don't have any idea of Chinese culture, contemporary culture, but is it correct, as I heard, that Chinese, especially Chinese universities and academics, are importing, for understanding what they are doing now in economics, that they are importing American neoliberalism, like Milton Friedman, and at the same time they're importing American conservatism, like Leo Strauss, to understand what they are doing now. So finally, they are importing Ronald Reagan in a certain way.
Yeah. Okay. It is true that, but it's not only, it's quite complicated because now the Chinese intellectual community, especially professionals, were so big, so different trends inside of that communities. But obviously, it was the overlapping. I think there was in time that when China started its economic reform, that was in the high tide of neoliberalism in the West. So this is Reagan-Thatcherism in the late 70s down to the 80s. That's the period when China began to send the overseas students studied in America and Britain and the European countries, together with Japan, especially at that time, were the United States, Britain, and Japan. At the same time, some global institutions promote that process because a lot of the economics, now the leading figures in Chinese economy were trained, many of them trained in Britain, was actually supported by the World Bank at that time. So they had a certain kind of a program was established in Oxford or other universities. Now, of course, now is a Canadian school, Harvard University or other the American universities. So those people were either the young scholars with quite my classmates. Some of them were sent to the Europe, Britain, or the American to study these. So that's why the first wave of the Western economics were translated into China or introduced into China were mainly those, for example, the Friedman or the Hayek. I think the von Hayek was much more influential, partly because not only because the economic, but also the political, because ideological is a great transition from that 80s to the 90s, that the great transition. His critique of Keynesianism or the welfare state, together with the socialism, were thought as a critique of the socialism in China too. So that's why serve as a kind of the tool of ideology. So that's where from my point of view, in the late 90s, especially the 90s, that was a high tide of the neoliberal move in China. It's not only for the intellectuals, but also the politicians and everywhere. Nowadays, maybe the new conservatism emerged again, and together with the introduction of the Leo Strauss, Carl Schmitt, or some other Western philosophers, and that became the new phenomenon. I think it's in a different ways. They are more active in the culture fields and the political fields, not necessarily the economic the fields.